So unfortunately, you heard one of the gentlemen in there say that he didn't think he could do it again, and that's engineer R.C. Ortinez, and he unfortunately is battling cancer again today. And then also Captain Todd Bechtel was in that video, and he again is struggling with cancer. And so our hearts go out to them, and like R.C. said, he didn't think he could do it again, but unfortunately he is. So that's the reason that we're here today, and the reason that we brought this program, and we'd like to share it with you. In this program, the CAPP program is a social change, behavioral change, social marketing, health promotion campaign, whatever you want to call it. But the intent of it is really to change behaviors. The reason for that is because behavior change is so important, right? A lot of firefighters out there, and you are all, or many of you are in leadership positions in your organization. And when you survey firefighters about how your departments can make change in terms of risk reduction as it relates to cancer in the workplace, you hear stuff like, we got to buy better washers, and we got to have better exhaust extraction, and we got to have, and we got to have, and we got to have. And I would suggest that while those things are true in part, the single biggest factor in terms of risk reduction in the workplace as it relates to cancer is behavioral change. And that was the intent of this program. When we formulated it, we thought, what can we do today, right? Because stuff like infrastructure change takes a long time. In San Diego Fire Department, we have many, many stations that are quite old. And the reality is they're not going to be upgraded. That's just not realistic. We thought, what can we do today that stands to make a big difference? And what stands to make a big difference is arming people with the tools and the knowledge to make effective behavioral change today in order to reduce their risk. And so that's the intent of this program. And to that end, we created this health promotion campaign. You can see that we have a brand here, and we wanted to make it really simple. Like a lot of times we go to classes and it's an hour-long PowerPoint, which of course we all enjoy, and there's so much information, it's really hard to capture exactly what was important. And so we thought we're going to make it really simple. We're going to make it really simple, and to that end, we focused on just 3 areas, and that's clean air, clean body, and clean gear. Just those 3 areas of focus, and we figure if folks can walk away committing that to memory, they'll be light years ahead in terms of reducing their risk and making it to retirement healthy and enjoying the fruits of their labor, which is the goal of this program. Now, Dr. Caro said it in a far more cerebral way, that we want to have compression and morbidity, that we want to live a long time healthy and then die, right? Compression and morbidity. But the reality is, I can say it in firefighter terms, and that would be that we want to make it to retirement healthy and enjoy the fruits of our labor. That's the intent of this program, that we get to enjoy that second phase of our life. So to that end, we created this brand, and that's our logo. And as Rob pointed out, again, we want to share this with folks. Our intent is that you can take this and it says Oceanside Fire Department, or it says Solana Beach, or it says Encinitas. We want to share what we have with you. If you like it, please take it. That's the intent. We want you to put your people's pictures on these posters so there's emotional connection. I can tell you that every fire station I went into, and I've been in, of course, all the fire stations presenting this. In fact, how we rolled the curriculum out was that I went out what we call company-level training format, and it was 2 engine companies at a time, so 8 folks and me, and I trained the entire department of 1,000 folks. So it was a lengthy process, and I know most of the folks, of course. We have a lot of new people, but I know the faces. And so when I would walk in to give the training, of course, they'd be like, oh my gosh, here we go again, more training, you're interrupting lunch, and whatever it might be. But I'll tell you what, stuff like personalizing these materials, these posters, making your own video if you can, that kind of thing, absolutely emotionally disarms people. Because I'd walk in and they'd be like this. And of course, I would look at the roster before I went to see who the organizational antigens would be, if you will, and so I would be prepared. And I will tell you, out of 1,000 people, roughly 1,000, I didn't get 1 ounce of pushback, not one joke, not one crack. Out of all those people, and we have some pretty crusty people. Would you agree, Chief? Yep. Absolutely. So we have a lot. And I will tell you that I got no pushback, and I think the reason for that is because we've personalized our program. We've customized it and made it culturally competent to our organization. Because unfortunately, when we watch a video in a place like Boston, Commissioner Joe Finn, the wonderful things he's doing, but we see Boston firefighters, we're quick to say, hey, they don't know what they're doing, which is nonsense. Of course they know what they're doing. They're doing wonderful things. but because it doesn't resonate with us. They're different than we are. And that's the importance of making a program that's unique to your organization, because it really connects with your folks. And I believe that's what drives behavioral change, is emotional connection. So to that end, this is our program. Now, some folks have contacted me and they said, hey, can we have your policies? How is this give me your policy that you wrote for this. And I will say, by good fortune, we don't have many. Because I would have been the guy writing them, and I'm ill-equipped to do that, and I have no desire to do that. So our program is based on mission-driven culture. And our organization is moving towards this leadership philosophy, which basically is we arm all employees with the authority or the power to take action based on leaders' intent. So everyone is armed with the ability to make decisions and implement action based on leaders' intent, rather than a lot of policies. And what I mean by that is we're just teaching people the why. We're making you want to engage in change because you understand why. And that's the intent of this program, rather than have it be policy-driven, because I, like you, don't like to memorize policies. And I don't believe that, right? I mean, an example of that would be, how many people know smoking is bad for them? Well, a lot. I mean, everybody knows it's bad for you. In the same way that everybody knows, there's not a firefighter out there that doesn't realize if you don't wear your breather that you're putting yourself at risk. They know that cognitively, but emotionally they forget. They get tired, they get fatigued, they fall prey to peer pressure, and then they fail to engage in those safe work practices. So to that end, we just want to arm folks with the why. And then through continuous training and education, we will engage. This cultural change will take hold, and ultimately will change our behaviors, and we'll have a new fire department in the years to come. So if you're looking for policies, there are very few. In the pamphlet you have on your desk, there's a couple of the position papers, if you will, that we wrote to kind of justify the things that we were asking for, washing machines and exhaust extraction upgrade and these sorts of things. And those are examples of the kinds of materials that we have. We certainly would be happy to share all of those with you. But again, those are just examples. But in terms of policies, not a lot. And let me talk just a second about leaders' intent, because I talk about arming folks with the ability to make decisions at all levels of the organization, because the folks that are in the field are the ones that are best suited to make those decisions. And that is comprised of task, purpose, and end state. And I'm sure all of you, many of you in this room, are very high-level leaders in your organizations, and you know more about this than I do. But simply for the sake of review, task, purpose, and end state. So this program, we ask folks to engage in the tasks: clean air, clean body, and clean gear, for the purpose of reducing the incidence of occupational cancer in the fire service, in order to reach the desired end state of making it to retirement healthy and enjoying the fruits of our labor. This program has nothing to do with running medical aids, putting fires out, or any and all of those things. It has, again, everything to do with us enjoying our career and making to retirement healthy and enjoying the next stage of our life. So that's the program, and now we'll jump into the body of it. So this is an important concept to understand. An important concept to understand is the fact that behavioral change is of the utmost importance. And the reason I say that is because public health professionals say genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. Genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. We don't know what our guns are loaded with. There are many people we work with that have a fatalistic attitude. They say, if I'm going to get cancer, I'm going to get it. So be it. And then they engage in unhealthy lifestyle behaviors like, tobacco or the sedentary lifestyle, lack of exercise, those sorts of things. And they adhere to this fatalistic attitude. But that is a particularly flawed way of thinking. Cancer, environmental factors as it relates to cancer, they potentially are responsible for upwards of 85–90% of all cancers. It's the exposures in the environment. And so because we don't know what our genetics are loaded with, we need to mitigate risk at every opportunity. We need to mitigate risk at every opportunity. And I remind folks that we work, and you know this, and again, nothing I say today is, I would suspect that today I'm not going to say things that you're going to say, wow, I've never heard that before. I've never heard that before. You've heard all the things I'm going to say, but this is our delivery and our package and how we connected with our people. So I want you to understand that there's not a lot of new stuff here, but we think this is an effective way to get it out to the folks. So we talk about genetics loading the gun, environment pulling the trigger. So what we ask our folks to do is we say at every opportunity, mitigate risk where you can, because we work in an uncontrolled environment. obviously. And there are many risks or exposures over which we have no control. We're going to get dirty. However, what we want you to do is do the little things every day that stand to make a big difference over the course of a long career. And what are those things? Well, when you're doing a regen or a pre-trip and you're running the rig out in front of the station, you close the app doors. Why fill the station up with diesel exhaust? It's when your buddy's gear is on the floor and you're going to pull the rig out in the morning, you pick it up and set it inside the rig so you don't soak the liners with diesel exhaust. It's not walking past an exhaust extractor that's falling off the rig. It's washing your bunkers after just a dumpster fire. It's masking up on unattended food. It's doing the little things every day that stand to make a big difference over the long haul. Now, clearly, one fire can cause cancer, and I think evidence of that, we have Newport Beach represented here, and I'm grateful that they're here. And I think we all remember in the 1980s the plating factory fire in Newport Beach, where several members developed leukemia, and that was the catalyst in part for the California presumptive law. And I think one of the members just passed away recently, I read in the paper. So we're sorry to hear that, but thankfully some good came out of that event, and that is that we have presumptive cancer legislation in the state of California. And thank you to Newport Beach for being here. So I remind folks, take charge of the risk factors over which you have control. And there are many every day, because again, we don't know what our gun's loaded with. So this program, when myself and others, our department, our nonprofit, firefighter aid, safety committee, and various folks in our organization that are concerned about occupational health and well-being and our members, we thought, how can we make change? And because we are generally dumb, I mean myself, I can speak for myself, because I've said countless times, I've said that we're 200 years of tradition unimpeded by change, and I took great pride in that as I wore my leather helmet. And I waited until this time to introduce myself because I wanted to explain to you my unique qualification to be up here speaking to you. And that is simply that I was the worst offender of all things that I'm speaking to. I'm not an MPH. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, I'm none of those things. I'm just a firefighter. And in fact, I'm a hoser, I'm a career hoser. And for those in the audience that are not in the fire service, that means I'm the lowest ranking person in the organization. I am the donkey. So I'm the person when they point that does the labor. So I'm not uniquely qualified other than the fact that everything I speak to, I have violated time and time again. And I woke up one day and here I am speaking to you. So that's me. That's me. And so we thought, how can we make change? And by good fortune, we bumbled upon some literature and organizational psychology about affecting change in macho cultures. And there was an article called Unmasking Manly Men. And it was written by the lead researcher, was named Robin Ely, who is a researcher at the Harvard School of Business. And she and her counterparts, in cooperation with a business consulting firm from San Francisco, went out to some oil platforms to engage in cultural change. And the reason that they did that was after the Blue Water Horizon event, we know that big environmental meltdown, the investigators realized that there was some stuff going on those platforms that led to that catastrophe. And that was this hyper-testosterone macho environment where no one would ever admit mistakes. People were afraid to ask for help. There was, wouldn't receive criticism. It was a crappy place to work. It was a crappy place to work. While they got the job done, it just wasn't a happy workforce. And so that contributed in some small way to that environmental meltdown, that catastrophe. And so over the course of the investigation, the energy company that owned those platforms, they said, we're going to change the way we do business. We're going to concentrate on our most important resource, and that is the oil rig worker. In the fire service, of course, it's the firefighter. But in this industry, they said, we're going to focus on the software, the most important part of these oil platforms, and that sits between the ears of the oil rig worker. And so they undertook a cultural change campaign that lasted 3 years on 2 platforms, the Rex and the Conus. And the Rex and the Conus sit 400 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. And they are everything a fire station is to an even greater degree. So a fire station, right, we go in for 24, 72, 96 hours, whatever it might be. These folks go out and work 6 weeks at a time, 24 or 12 hours on, 12 hours off for 6 weeks. And it's all male. So it's everything that goes on in a fire station to an even greater degree goes on out there. And they did affect change. In consultation with this energy company that was very progressive, these business consultants from San Francisco, and the Harvard School of Business. And at the end of 3 years, they said, we did it. We changed the culture. It's successful. We're a better place. And how do we know that? Because they measured it. They measured reliability, productivity, safety, efficiency, and they interviewed the workers. Across all metrics, they exceeded industry benchmarks like it never had been seen before. It was quite remarkable. So because they were able to affect cultural change on this thing that arguably has even dumber people than the fire service, I'm confident we can make change like they did. So from there, we collaborated with Dr. Robin Eli from Harvard and the gentleman from the energy company, and they could not have been more gracious with their time. We interviewed them, we had some teleconferences, and they lent their expertise to us, and it helped us craft what we believe is a successful program. So because they can do it, we can do it. So we know who this is, right? Right, okay, so everybody says Gordon Graham, and if you've never seen Gordon Graham, and for the folks in the audience that haven't seen him, I highly recommend him. He's a wonderful guy. He's like a nutty professor, and he does his whole presentation on an overhead projector. And he has complete mastery of the material, and this I think is probably, what, a third of the way through the presentation right here. So as he goes on his wonderfully informative presentation. And so for many of you that have seen him speak, you know what this says, and his matrix says, hey, we should concentrate the greatest amount of our efforts on the very high-risk, low-frequency events that we partake in, and that's zero-zero search and ventilating a panelized roof and getting the window washer off the side of a building and trench rescue and confined space and all those things. We should put the greatest amount of our training efforts into those, and because they stand to kill us. And I would certainly say that there's merit to that. Certainly we have an obligation to the public that we serve, to one another, and also it's fun, right? So training is fun, builds camaraderie, esprit de corps, and certainly it's vital to our function. So he says, commit the greatest amount of energy to high-risk, low-frequency events. And for all the reasons I stated, we should be doing those things. But I would suggest that it is not the high-frequency or the high-risk, low-frequency events that's killing us, and you know that. It is not getting wrapped up in wires. It is not falling through floors. It is not falling off roofs, through roofs, getting run over on the freeway. Any or all of those things combined are a drop in the bucket when it comes to occupational disease. So while we need to dedicate efforts to those training endeavors, we certainly need to keep things in perspective. It is not the fire ground that's killing us. It's occupational disease. And while we certainly have an obligation to train in fire ground activities, we need to pay equal attention to those things related to occupational disease, right? It's the low-risk stuff. It's every day. It's walking past an exhaust extractor that's not hooked up. It's, again, not picking your buddy's gear up off the floor when you're going to pull the rig out and you're going to saturate the liners with diesel exhaust. It is, and here's one that I don't think a lot of people think about, it is wearing your bunkers unnecessarily at night. I know that I would only wash my bunkers annually. But I would wear them at night because my identity is a firefighter. So I'd pull them on because I want to separate myself from other folks that aren't firefighters. So I wear my bunkers at night. Well, my bunkers sit on the app floor all the time, and they needlessly absorb all the toxins that are on the apparatus floor. And I pull them up, and at night my crotch is warm, I'm sweating, and I'm becoming far more absorbent and more receptive to these chemicals and these toxins. So that's one place I would suggest people take immediate action, is to stop wearing your bunkers at night when you don't need to. I mean, certainly these pants or your Class B pants are just as comfortable, and I would wash those at least monthly. So that's far cleaner than the bunker pants. But we need to stop paying lip service to the stuff that we're doing every day, right? There's a lot of stuff that we're doing every day that is very high risk, high frequency, right? High risk, high frequency stuff that we're doing every day. So what we need to do is develop unconscious competence, as Gordon Graham states, right? And remember, he illustrates the point, and he talks about the law enforcement officers that, you know, go to the range and shoot and pick up their brass and shoot and pick up their brass, and then they go out in the field and they get in a gunfight and they bend over to pick up their brass and they end up getting shot because they've been unconsciously conditioned to do so. In the same way that we do training to develop unconscious competence on the fire ground, purge valve, buddy breather, whatever it might be. In the same way that we need to develop unconscious competence as it relates to cancer prevention. And those are all the little things that we do every day. All the little things that we do every day over the course of our long careers. So the statistics, you know, for years we've heard cardiovascular disease is the biggest killer of firefighters. And I would like you to look at these statistics. And again, this is all, much of this was very new to me, right? I had the good fortune when I got in my position to read and learn. And my department and firefighter aid and all were very patient with me as we developed this. So many of these things were new to me. And in fact, I called the NFPA about this because I didn't quite understand. And that is, if you look at these statistics, there's a difference between the cause of death or line of duty between the NFPA and the IFF. And that seems strange. They should be consistent. Well, the NFPA only tracks that kind of thing on the fire ground, like so structural collapse, running out of air, getting disoriented on the fire ground, getting run over on the freeway, or maybe you're dead in your rack 24 hours after duty or something like that. They track the short-term deaths. They track the traumatic fire ground events. They don't track long-term occupational disease, whether it's infectious disease, cancer, that sort of thing. And so that's why the IFF number stands in such stark contrast, because they track occupational disease. And so it's important to understand that the fact is 2/3 of the people that are going on the wall in Colorado Springs are dying from occupational cancer. Again, it's not the fire ground. The fire ground is not killing our people in any meaningful number. It is occupational disease. So please keep that in perspective when allocating resources and when doing training and doing all the good things that we do as a fire service. So have people seen Toxic Hot Seat? I'm sure you have, right? Toxic Hot Seat. So Toxic Hot Seat, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Toxic Hot Seat is a documentary, and it talks about toxins on the modern fire ground. And it chronicles a gentleman named Tony Stefani, who now runs the San Francisco Firefighter Cancer Foundation, and they're a fantastic group that's done a lot of good. And Captain Stefani, as a young man, developed bladder cancer, and it was an aggressive form of cancer. Several other members in his fire station developed the same form of cancer throughout the course of his treatment. They thought, well, there are toxins that you're exposed to on the fire ground that may have contributed to this, because the form of cancer you got is not something typically associated with people your age. And so they started to focus on that. And one of the areas they zeroed in on were flame retardants. And so throughout the movie in Toxic Hot Seat, it's quite disturbing, all the politics and so forth that are involved with it. I'm certainly not going to get into that here, but you'll be dismayed when you watch the movie at some of those activities. But suffice it to say, they focused in on flame retardants. And so, in the 70s, 80s, many years ago, they started to, California had a test, a flaming test for furnishings. And so in order to meet these requirements, the industry started to inject flame retardants into the furnishings. And these flame retardants are known carcinogenic materials. And so they inject these flame retardants, and they're in everybody. They're in you, they're in your spouse, they're in your kids, they're in your dog, they're in all of us. Because these materials are shed from furnishings all around us all the time. Right? But I would imagine that when the industry, and there's more to it than this, but very simplistically, I would imagine that when the industry went to the regulatory bodies and they said, hey, we want to inject this known carcinogen into these furnishings because it will help prevent the spread of fire, they said, well, okay, that's reasonable because the poison is in the dose. And we all know that. The poison is in the dose, and the dose is very small, and the benefit outweighs the risk. And so we'll inject this known carcinogenic flame retardant into materials, again, because the poison is in the dose. Well, that's not the case for us as firefighters. Actually, these flame retardants pose a much more significant risk to us. And how do we know? Because they measured it. Researchers from the State University of New York, they measured known carcinogenic flame retardant levels in the bloodstream of firefighters pre- and post-interior attack. Now, of course, firefighters during a test are on air. They're wearing their breather. So they're absorbing these materials through their skin. And what they found was levels of these retardants were 3 times greater in the bloodstream of firefighters post-interior attack. So that was a real wake-up, because it's very easy for us to, it's very reasonable to assume that we're exposing ourselves when we're not wearing our breather. But myself and many others, I think we fail to appreciate how much we're absorbing through our skin. So evidence of that is this undertaking. Now, I would suggest to you that is it reasonable to find a causal link with these flame retardants and cancer in firefighters? And I would say absolutely not. Because we really don't know what we're exposed to. When people have the good fortune to go into a structure fire, because it's so rare, right? We run 1,000 medical aids and then we go to a fire, right? So run 1,000 medical aids and we go to a fire, and we have the good fortune of doing what we love to do. We don't know what we're exposed to, right? We don't know if it's the pesticides or the paint that's in the corner or the burning surfboard or it's the car or it's the porcelain dollies above our head. We have no idea. We're never going to know. So the idea that we can pin down a causal link to the agent that's causing cancer in firefighters is just not possible because we don't know what we're exposed to. It's too dynamic of an environment. The causes of cancer in the fire service are multifactorial and likely flame retardants contribute to that in some degree, but it's important to understand that all fuels pose a significant health risk. They all off-gas carcinogens, and we need to appreciate that there's an association between firefighting and cancer, and I think that's about as far as we'll get with that. I'd also like you to look at this and appreciate something here because I know you're thinking, what were they doing in 1955 and 60? It seems to me that they had things wired because there was 0 cancer cases. And I would like to remind you that in 1955, of course I wasn't around, I may look like it, but I wasn't, that the doctors were on TV smoking cigarettes, right? Coal miners didn't wear respiratory protection. So it isn't like they had things wired, they just hadn't connected the dots. They didn't realize that firefighting, the byproducts of combustion were absorbed through the skin and that not wearing a breather was bad for you, and they were all smoking, and there was no data collection. And there was no presumptive cancer laws. So all those things contributed to 0 data in yesteryear. What's important to understand, and what this graph illustrates, is that cancer is on the rise in the fire service, and I think evidence of that is the fact that 2/3 of the people that are going on the wall in Colorado Springs are dying of occupational cancer, and to a lesser degree cardiovascular disease. So that's the take-home point from this, and if you have an opportunity to watch Toxic Hot Seat, I encourage you to do so. You'll be alarmed, and it will enlighten you significantly. And kudos to Captain Stefani and the San Francisco Firefighter Cancer Foundation. They're a heck of an organization. So this here, being a firefighter, I see these things, and some of you in this room obviously are much brighter than me about medical issues and so forth. But when I see this, and you understand this clearly, but when I see it, I think, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything to me. And so that is relative risk increase. And what that means is if you're a firefighter, you have this much more chance of catching cancer or developing cancer than someone in the general population. But in order to add meaning to this, you have to know what the absolute risk is. And so that you would find that, you can look it up online, American Cancer Society or other resources on the web, and what you would find is the absolute risk, for example, of developing prostate cancer is 12 in 100 men or so will develop prostate cancer over the course of their life, 12 in 100. So then what we would do is we'd multiply 12 times 1.28, and it comes out to about 15 or so that are exposed to firefighting. So when you see these things, it's important to try and understand and give it context in order to provide meaning. And so that's the case with this. So there's an alarming number. Of course, the breast cancer rate in San Francisco, 6 times the average for female firefighters in San Francisco. They don't know the cause for that. There are reasons that sort of have limited the amount of data we have about women in the fire service, and that is the sheer lack of, or the number of women in the fire service is not many. And then, of course, bias in medical research that's been going on for years has limited the amount of data that we have about that. So currently, they're doing research with UC Berkeley, and they're comparing San Francisco City firefighters with San Francisco City workers that are female, and they're trying to glean some information from that. And they've done great work. So the important thing that we try and to remind people is that while we glamorize the death in the top picture, again, falling through the roof, off the roof, getting lost and disoriented, being burned over, flash over, whatever it might be, the reality is if we're going to die as a result of our chosen occupation, it is far more likely that it will occur in hospice after a lengthy, protracted battle with cancer. And that's just a fact. So Commissioner Joe Finn, again, I mentioned his name previously, and he's a wonderful leader in the fire service. And you know, Boston's doing great stuff with cancer prevention. He told myself and a group of others recently at one of these events that we went to that he talked about the Beacon Street fire, which we remember years ago, wind-driven fire on the Charles River, and the 2 folks were trying to advance the line in the basement, and they were burned over, and they died. And we've all heard the audio, and it's very compelling and very stirring video. And so Commissioner Finn talks about the fact that they had this tremendous service for those 2 firefighters, and rightfully so. It was a tremendous event, and all the folks in the city turned out, 2 people. But he also talks about in the same year that he buried 4 folks from occupational cancer. He buried 4 in the same year from occupational cancer, and he asked us as a group, how many people do you think showed up for their funeral? And the answer is none, other than their family and so forth, none. So it was not an event celebrated by the community, and they were no less a heroes than the folks that died in the basement on the Charles River. So the important thing to remember is that we need to keep it in context and perspective, the likely causes of our death due to our chosen profession. But the good news is we can take action to prevent that. So here's a couple numbers for you. Boston, San Francisco, Miami, and San Diego. And I think an important thing to remember is that, cancer is the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States, right? So half the population is going to develop cancer, a third of them are going to die from it. But what's unique about us as firefighters is that many of us develop these cancers, more aggressive forms of cancer, and we develop it at earlier ages. And I think it stands to reason, because if cancer and disease is an intersection of environment and genetics, the dilemma for firefighters is we can get a lifetime of exposures at a single fire, as evidenced by the Newport Beach event in the 1980s. That was a single fire, and they absolutely got cancer from that singular event. So the dilemma for us is that we get a compressed amount of exposure in a short period of time. And I think that's one of the most significant factors that sets us apart from the general population. So why is it that we believe that there is an association between firefighting and cancer, right? Because there are certainly detractors out there, but the good news is that we have well done, large, long-term studies that have absolutely substantiated the association between cancer and firefighting, and these are them. But of course, by outfits like NIOSH and Dr. Lemasters and so forth, these have absolutely established the fact that there is a strong association between firefighting and cancer. Now, people have asked me in the San Diego Fire Department when I presented this, they said, hey, are we doing the right thing? And I'm like, oh yeah, we're doing the right thing. I mean, we know that intuitively. We know there's benefit to the things we're suggesting. But their question was, are we going to be able to detect a difference in our organization? And I said, absolutely not. We're only 1,000 people, right? In order to develop like statistical significance that really means something, you got to have 10,000 people, 30,000 people over 10 years, 20 years, because the seeds for cancer today, it's going to develop a couple years from now, they're already planted, right? So we don't know that we're not going to appreciate a statistical reduction in cancer on our job, because maybe the increase we've seen over the last couple years is just a natural sort of variance in the frequency of the disease. We don't know. But what we do know is we're doing the right things. We're removing carcinogenic materials, we're preventing absorption, we're wearing our breather, we're washing our gear, we're doing the right things. So, and especially for organizations that are smaller than San Diego, absolutely you're not going to appreciate that. But we know what we're doing are based on best practices, they're intuitively the right thing to do, they're removing carcinogens, known carcinogens from us. Now I want to point out these 2 things on the bottom here, because they're really important to understand, because I think they mask the magnitude of the problem. And one of those is healthy worker effect. Healthy worker effect is a term used in public health. And what that means is that it potentially could kind of skew the numbers, right? And what I mean by that is people that are hired in the fire service are generally healthier than most folks, right? We generally engage in exercise. We don't do unhealthy lifestyle behaviors. We work out, all those sorts of things. So just by virtue of our lifestyle, we should be healthier than most folks in the general population. And by virtue of that, we should have a lower incidence of cancer. Well, strangely, we have a higher incidence of cancer in spite of not smoking, exercising, and those sorts of things. So that in itself helps to mask the magnitude of the problem. Additionally, underreporting. So you may know, thankfully, House Resolution 4625, Firefighter Cancer Registry Act, was just passed, I think, 2 weeks ago. And we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but kudos to Congress for doing the right thing. And that's going to be something very promising for the fire service, because we're going to collect a tremendous amount of data, and it's going to help to raise money and direct research and do really good things. That's a very positive thing. But up until this point, we have very limited data collection, very poor data collection. There's only 36 or so states that have presumptive cancer laws. and it's increasing as the years go by. But those particular states, of course, there's data that we can gather from them. But for the remaining 14 states, there are 50, right? 14, 36, 14, okay. So those states we don't collect data from. We also miss retirees. And what about volunteers, right? So I know volunteerism here in California with the professional fire service is not to the same degree as it is in other parts of the country, but the vast majority of the fire service in much of the country are volunteers. And so we miss the cancer in those folks. So the reality is, because the healthy worker effect and underreporting, the magnitude of this problem is masked significantly. It is a much bigger deal than we think. It is a much bigger deal than we think. So I'd like to think that myself, that Brian Frieders, the San Diego Fire Department, Rob Bunzold, and all of us are super smart, and we just figured this out, and we told you that the byproducts of combustion are bad for you, and that you need to get them off of you as quick as you can, and here's the tools to do it. The reality is we're a couple hundred years late to the party. This has been around for a long time. It's been around for a long time. This is on page 1 of all public health textbooks, and they talk about Dr. Percival Potts. So Dr. Percival Potts was a surgeon in London in the 1700s, and he notices that chimney sweeps have a much higher incidence of scrotal and testicular cancer, and he tries to figure out why. He doesn't figure out the causal link, but he knows there's an association between being covered in soot and ash and cancer. He knows that. So he passes the very first occupational health and safety laws in the world, and that required that chimney sweeps get a shower at least once a week, and if you were less than 8, you were prohibited from joining that elite cadre of professionals. So there were very aggressive laws. But the irony is, I'm standing up here telling you today you should take a shower. Well, they were onto this in 1775. 1775. So it's finally time we get along with the program here. So I remind folks, I say, does the chimney sweep in the middle look much different than the gentleman on the right? And the answer to that is clearly not. And then depending on my audience, which was always entertaining, because if it was very junior folks, and we have a lot of junior folks in the San Diego Fire Department, I would say, are we going to look like the guy on the right? And of course, they're thinking, what does he want me to say? And they would say, no, of course not. We're not going to look like that guy on the right. And I'm like, that's the wrong answer. You are dopes. I would say, I hope that you go to a fire this afternoon. And I hope you're filthy. Maybe the face is a little bit much, but I would say, I hope that you look filthy. I hope that you go to a fire. It's why we come to work. It's what we enjoy. It's the teamwork. It's the camaraderie. It's the esprit de corps. It's all the good things about the fire service, going out and doing the things we love. I hope you look like that. But I just want to remind people that both the visible and invisible contaminants that are on us cause cancer. Get them off you as quick as you can. We're going to get dirty. That's perfectly acceptable. It's why we come to work. We're not taking anything away from our identity as firefighters by encouraging folks to engage in safe work practices. We're just saying get dirty and get cleaned up as quick as you can. Rehabilitate the most important resource. How many times, all of us in this room, at least in the fire service component, I can assure you, you've done this. You're on the truck and you go to a fire and you back in and you say, what's the first thing we got to do? We got to rehab the saws right now. Rehab the saws. And for the folks that are not in the fire service, right, we use the chainsaws to cut a hole in the roof to release the superheated gases and help extinguish the fire, increase visibility and all the good things that it does. But we say, we got to rehab the saws right now. Let's get back to we call it the oil room, and we take the saws apart and clean them up. Well, they were in service at the scene. We refueled them and started them. They work, and they certainly can work dirty. But we put this great emphasis on rehabbing the gear. The chainsaws, we got to get the hose bed squared away, and then we do this for an hour and a half. And then finally, we change out our new gear and we go take a shower. We say we need to change the way we do business. We are the most important resource. Fire engines last 15 years, a set of bunkers lasts 7, and we last for 30 years. So we are the single most important resource. So what does that mean? It means when we're on the truck and we pull in tomorrow, I would hope that the officer says, hey, you guys, go get cleaned up first. Let's rehabilitate ourselves. That means get a shower right away. That means get your new bunker gear that's prepped in your locker, right? I always remind folks, because we know we never snap our gear together, and then at 2 a.m. you have a fire and you're like, oh my God, I don't want to snap it together. I'll bet that we're not going to get another call, and then of course you get a ringer an hour later and you got to put your wet gear on and you're like, oh, I'm so lazy, I'm such a dope. And so I remind people, hey, if your stuff's in your locker, snap it, have it ready to go. So you pull it out, set it by the rig, take a shower, get a drink of water, and then we come out with rubber gloves on, right? We want to minimize our exposures. Put rubber gloves on and rehabilitate the gear. The gear is secondary to us. Of course, it needs to be in service, I get that. But the gear is secondary to us. We are the most important resource. It's not about chainsaws and fire engines and those sorts of things, because a highly motivated, highly trained, healthy workforce can do a hell of a lot with mediocre gear. And so I think that's very important to understand. Rehabilitate us, the most important resource. So again, but thankfully there would be people in the room that had more years on the job, and they might think for a second, what does he want me to say? And then they would say, I don't care what he wants me to say because that's not important to me. And they say, of course we're going to look like that. And that's the right answer. We're going to look like that. So these things mean nothing to me. To Jonathan, our industrial hygienist, it means a lot to him, all these chemicals. And so this means nothing to me. But I want to remind you that all fuels produce toxic byproducts of combustion, right? We've all been on unattended food. You come down the street, one call only, structure fire, 5 p.m., and you can smell the food down the street, and you're like, unattended food. And so you pop the door and you run into the smoke, and we never mask up because we're like, I got to save my air for that next event. Well, statistically, the next event's not going to happen for a year or two. The likelihood of getting a lifetime fire right after that unattended food is like none. But we're quite certain it's going to happen. So we save our air, run in under the smoke, pull the thing off the stove, throw it in the sink, call for a blower, and run back out coughing, saying, oh gosh, I'm glad I saved my air. So we got to stop that. All fires produce toxic byproducts of combustion. And whether that fire is a structure fire, whether it's unattended food, or it's exhaust from an internal combustion engine, it's all byproducts of combustion. And it all causes cancer, and we need to take great measures to reduce our exposure in periods of time over which we have control. And we certainly have control when we wear our breather and when we hook the extractor up and do those little things. So, of course, when the danger is visible, we wear our breather, but we want to remind people, we've all said, wear your breather on a dumpster fire and a car fire. I think we're pretty good about that. The picture on the top right, we obviously would wear a breather there, car fire. But I want to remind folks, and we all know this, but I just have to say it. Overhaul is the most dangerous phase, right? We're going to talk about wearing our breather in a second. But combustion is least complete. Byproducts of combustion are the most plentiful. And it's the time when we're tired and there's no visible danger. And so we take our mask off. I can't tell you how many times I, like many of you wear the bottle and your mask hangs here to collect drywall. And you just keep working. And I don't know why I'm wearing my bottle but not my mask. Right? I don't know why I'm doing that. So we're going to change the way. And then you have a headache for 2 days and you think, God, that was so fun, and how dumb I am. So again, stay on air. And then in the last picture, I just want to speak to two things. One is brush fires. There's nothing reasonable that we can wear to brush fire. Byproducts, I worked for the Forest Service years ago, and I used to think, grass fire, timber fire, it's just whole food smoke. It's natural. It's not bad for me. Apparently, it is bad for me. But there's no reasonable way to protect ourselves. A bandana doesn't do it. I know we had hot shields and all these things, and just we don't wear them. It's just culturally not something that's associated with wildland firefighting. They're uncomfortable and cumbersome. Hopefully someday they develop something, but in the meantime, I would suggest that people do everything they can to stay out of the smoke. And what is that? If you're staged out of the, you stage out of the smoke, or there's not a lot you can do. You're going to get exposed, right? And then the second thing I'd like to point out is try not to attack from the green. So, okay. So, little fire humor, right? Okay. So this picture, how many people have seen this picture? Many of us. If there's any picture, or if there is any more compelling picture to emphasize the importance of gross decon, I haven't seen it. This is it. This will really drive home the point of how significant the exposure is to us from absorption through our gear. And so this thing is called fluorescent aerosol screening test. It's done by the Department of Defense, and what they do is they take a soldier or a Marine or whatever it might be, a test subject, they put them in a CBRN suit, they throw them in this booth, and they move around like this, and they squirt out of the nozzles in the booth an agent that's the same size as whatever they're testing for, and they say the suit has good integrity, you're ready to roll. So the fire service says, it's a good idea. Why don't we take something that's the same size as smoke? They found silica, whatever that is, and they attach fluorescence to it, and they squirted it out of the nozzles in this spray booth where the firefighter's doing this on air, 10, 15 minutes, mimicking fireground activities, and they brought them out. Now, attached to the silica is fluorescence. So on the left, what you see is natural fluorescence of the skin prior to the test, and on the right, you see what's gotten through the gear. You see what's gotten through the gear. Pretty remarkable. So those are carcinogens, those are toxins that have gotten through your gear and deposited on your skin. You can see the neck is especially vulnerable. For years, we've made the argument that I don't want to be totally encapsulated because I want to be able to sense the rising heat and impending flashover, and so I got to have this weak link, and so I wear this hood. Maybe a good argument. But the important thing to remember is that area is particularly vulnerable. There's an increased incidence of head and neck cancer in the fire service. There's an increased incidence of blood cancer in the fire service. Every minute, all the blood goes through your neck. Great vessels, thyroid, lymphatic, all that baloney is right here in your neck. For every few degree increase in skin temperature, absorption increases by literally hundreds of %. What have we done hundreds of times? We get knocked down on a fire, and we walk outside and we say, let's go BS on the tailboard and drink some water and talk about what a good job we did. And you likely did. But then we pull our head or our hood down around our neck, and we go out and we stand at the back of the rig and drink water and wait for the investigators. And the whole time we're absorbing bad stuff that's contributing to our increased risk of cancer. What are the little things that we can do every day that stand and make a big difference to reduce our risk of cancer? How about you take your hood off every time you come out of the structure and stick it in your pocket? How about as leaders in your organizations, you buy everybody a second or a third hood? San Diego Fire Department, we have a bag in our rig that contains several extra hoods, and we have wipes to wipe ourselves down. If you're not doing those things, I suggest you do. Make clean hoods available. The good news is that the technology is improving. You're probably familiar with Gore and DuPont and others are developing barrier technology, which is going to prevent much of this from happening in the future, but the costs are high right now. Hopefully economy of scale drives that down in the future, and we'll all be using hoods that will prevent much of this from happening. But I want you to understand that it's never going to completely go away. This will always be a weak link, and we need to provide people with the tools to reduce their risk. Again, that's the decontamination wipes, and it is providing people with extra hoods. That is the weak link. So there's your neck. Dr. Rohr, do you want to add anything to this? No? Okay, all right. But there's a lot of important stuff in your neck, right? We got a lot of important stuff in our neck. And again, for every few degree increase in skin temperature, absorption increases by literally hundreds of %. Let's keep our necks clean. Let's give people the tools to reduce their risk. So before I get into the things that we offered folks as a solution or our approach to reducing cancer risk in our workplace, we just want to start from a place of shared agreement in order to have a solution that we all agree upon. And I think these are non-negotiables. We don't want to get cancer. We want to retire, enjoy our life, be there for our family. And really importantly, we want to be an aggressive firefighter. So to that end, I want you to read that. And I remind all of our folks, so I was the worst offender of all these things, and I'm sure I would take great offense to this lecture when I was 25 years old because my identity was wrapped up in being a firefighter, and it's very important to me that I'm aggressive and that we stretch lines aggressively and cut holes and search buildings and do all the good things we do. And I want people to understand that there's nothing about this program that suggests we're going to do anything otherwise. We're going to continue to do the good work we do. What we're just asking people to do is when there's like no emergency, don't do stupid things. Don't go into the smoldering motorhome on the side of the freeway and drag out a mattress with no mask on because you got to save your air for that next event that's not going to happen. We can't do that. We have to stop doing those things. So this has nothing to do with reducing our aggressiveness as firefighters. There's our program. And one more time on mission-driven culture. And this is important to our program, again, because we didn't want to write a lot of policies, and it may work for your organization or may not, but it's central to our success here. And that is that we're empowering employees at all levels of the organization to take action. We don't have a big policy manual. So we ask our captains, we ask all employees, but of course the captains are the linchpin of any program. The captains setting the example are the most important players in this program. So to that end, we ask our captains to do the right thing in terms of risk reduction in the workplace. And what are examples of those? Because you say, well, what does that really mean? And I say, what does it really mean? Is during overhaul, being truly a quarterback, rotating crews during assignments to reduce cumulative exposure, calling more resources. How about if you're at a fire and it's a hoarder? The folks that were first in, you know you're going to be there for several hours for overhaul. How about those first in crews? They get sent back to their station to get cleaned up. They took the most heat. They extended the initial lines. They're the filthiest. They're the greatest. They're the most at risk. How about kicking them back to quarters to get cleaned up? Is that a change in the way we do business? Absolutely. Is it appropriate? Absolutely. Again, how about a fire where we go, crews initially try and make offensive attack and they get pushed out and we put the sticks up and we're going to be there for 5 hours watching the master streams doing nothing. Those first few people that rolled in and tried to extend a line offensively and they got pushed out of the structure, well, they're the filthiest. They took the most heat. They had the greatest exposure. How about we kick them back to quarters? You say, well, we have hose and ladders committed from our rig. How are we going to do that? I don't know how you're going to do it. What we would tell our officers, because people would say to me, well, how do you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. You and the IC, because you have the best interest of our workforce in mind, will figure out how to do that. It means maybe taking a rig from staging. Maybe it means taking a utility rig. Who knows? But the important thing is we need to reduce risk where we can, and that means getting the bad stuff off us as quick as we can. So those are examples of ways that we've empowered our workforce to take action. And lastly, I'll say this, is we encourage folks, if they're filthy, to remain out of service for decon after a fire to go back and get cleaned up. Now, I realize not all organizations have the resources that San Diego does. It may be easier for us, but I think it's conceptually something to consider, and that would be for the crews that are really, really dirty. It's really important to get them cleaned up in a hurry because we know after a fire, while we might not get a second working fire after the first, I bet we'll get a medical aid. Right? And so then we go to somebody's house and we're filthy and we go in and we do our thing. And the likelihood of that is statistically very high. But instead, consider allowing them to go back to quarters and get cleaned up. And we don't have a rule because people would ask me, well, how dirty, how long? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. You do the right thing. And so that's what mission-driven culture says. It says do the right thing based on leaders' intent. What's leaders' intent here? Desired end state is make it to retirement healthy, enjoy the fruits of our labor. To that end, take action to reduce risk by getting the bad stuff off you as quick as you can. That's the goal of this program. When we think about companies that do good things for their employees, if you open any business book, they'll talk about these outfits right here, right? They'll talk about Southwest Airlines, right? So Herb Kelleher has said, founder of Southwest Airlines, which has been profitable every year since they were their creation, which is the only airline to do so. And he says, take care of the people, the planes will be on time. Take care of the people, the planes will be on time. In the fire service for decades, we put a great emphasis on hardware. We talk about our fire engines and we talk about our equipment and our gear. And I would suggest that we need to change the way we do business and start to talk about the most important resource again, and that's our people. Because if we have a happy, healthy, motivated workforce, the EMS calls will get run and the fires will go out. That's what Southwest Airlines does. So, and then Nordstrom. If you knew me, you'd know I don't shop at Nordstrom, right? I got for this event here, Rob and others were suggesting I wear a suit, and I said, I just can't do that. And I said, so I'll go invest in some Dockers, and I did, and so here I am. I don't shop at Nordstrom. But what I want to recognize is the fact that Nordstrom has long been a leader in empowering employees to do the right thing. Nordstrom's rule book for years, and I imagine the real rule book when they go to court is different than than the one they speak to, because what they say is their rule book simply states do the right thing in all situations. Do the right thing in all situations. So they empower their employees on the sales floor to make the customers happy, whatever that means, right? To make the customers happy, to do the right thing for Nordstrom. And that's what I would suggest we need to do as a fire service, right? We need to understand people are our most important resource. We need to empower our folks to do the right thing. And that's the direction we're headed, the San Diego Fire Department. And I would like to say that we don't think we have it mastered. Firefighter aid, San Diego Fire Department, we're not by any means suggesting that we have this whole problem wired. What we're here to do is share our experiences with you and have you understand this is a long journey and we're all traveling it together. And that we have a long ways to go, but this is the direction we're headed, and I think it's a fantastic direction to go. I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's a significant underpinning of this program. So now here's the meat and potatoes, and we're near the end. I would imagine many of you have to go to the bathroom, but here's some real important stuff. And many of the things I speak to here are reflected in the position papers that you have access to, and there's one in there about exhaust as an example. But some of the things we changed in our department were our SCBA policy. And this is one of the policies. I think we did this within 2 weeks of undertaking this because I was so surprised with what I read. And that is that there is no correlation between CO and any number of toxins that are in an environment post-knockdown of the fire. San Diego Fire Department, for years, we would, I think it was 25 parts per million was our threshold. We would say less than 25 parts per million, you can take your BA off. Frankly, I never saw anybody with the gas meter inside a structure anyway. It was just when the fire was out, we'd take our gear off and we were good to go. But the book said 25 parts per million. So I read some stuff in Phoenix. We all know Phoenix has done a lot of good things. And I read some material from 2000 in Phoenix. And I also read a study from a place called Tualatin Valley, which is a 22-station department south of Portland. And they did the same study in 2011. And what they did was they took dual-function firefighter hazmat techs, and they went out to about 60 fires between the two agencies. And as soon as they got knocked down, they took off their fire helmets and put on their propeller hats, and they put out the advanced air monitoring. And they monitored 50 or so airborne carcinogens and pulmonary irritants and so forth. And what they found was that there was zero correlation between CO and all this other bad stuff. So whoever made that up was likely trying to do the right thing, but nothing could be more wrong. So we immediately changed our policy, and we went to 100% SCBA use throughout the entire event. Throughout the entire event. From initial attack throughout overhaul. From initial attack throughout overhaul. A study in 2000 and in 2011 had the exact same results. So, of course, what does that mean to an organization? Well, it means decreased work capacity, right? Heat exhaustion, all those things. I get it. So what do we say to people? We say, you got to wear your BA longer. Thankfully, we only get a fire once every 6 months. You have plenty of time to rest in between. But also, call more resources, rotate frequently, take more breaks, do less work. It's okay. We all know the employee that's at greatest at risk is a probationary employee that's trying to prove their value, right? That's the most dangerous one because they'll work till they drop dead. We want to stop them just short of that. But I say we're going to wear our breather the entire event. Take more breaks, rotate frequently, call more resources. We got to wear our breather the entire time. The evidence suggests it's the right thing to do. A lot of people say, well, why can't I wear an APR? Well, again, in Phoenix, in 2000, they had an industrial hygienist on staff, and she did a lot of great work, and they measured 26 Tucson firefighters with 25 Phoenix firefighters, both groups doing overhaul, and afterwards they found that pulmonary function was decreased in both groups. APRs are not safe. We already know that. Why? Because if you're going to do a home improvement project tomorrow, and you want to wear a respiratory protection, you're going to drive to Home Depot and select the correct, it's interactive now, the correct cartridge. You're going to get the right filter. Well, what's the right filter for the fire you're going to go to? I have no idea. I have no idea. Do they provide value? They provide value, absolutely. I carried one in my bag for the last few years before I came to my current duties, and because I didn't care what people thought of me anymore. And so I would wear an APR. Did it provide some degree of protection? Absolutely. Was it safe? No. The next slide will illustrate the degree of safety, and I'll get to that in a second. But the bottom line is we got to wear our breather. And if you're measuring CO as a measure when to take your breather off today, please change tomorrow. I can give you the material that supports that and give you the research papers and so forth that suggest that that's the right thing to do. Wear your breather. Diesel exhaust. We are modernizing our diesel exhaust extraction systems in many stations, and this is unique to San Diego, but you may have the same situation at your organization, or you may not even have exhaust extraction. There are large metropolitan departments in this country that don't have exhaust extraction systems today. And diesel exhaust is a group 1 carcinogen, which means it definitely causes cancer in humans. And you might say, well, we have post-2010 rigs with regen. And I would say it still causes cancer. Industry will tell you, and they have some industry publications that will tell you the only thing that comes out of those exhaust pipes is nitrogen and water. In fact, I went to a local college that has a diesel program to learn about diesel exhaust because I didn't know anything about it, and I was putting this thing together, and so I spoke to them, and they're very bright people. And they told me about diesel engines and about industry, and they said the only thing that comes out of that tailpipe is nitrogen and water, and I would suck on it. And I'm like, really? Wow, that is weird. So anyway, so the bottom line is it's not safe. And how do I know? Because I called the California Air Resources Board. And I spoke with the chief biochemist there, and she was very kind to me and spoke to me on several occasions. And she said a post-2010 rig does burn cleaner. But there's a couple issues. One of them is all the constituents that existed in the previous exhaust are still there to a lesser degree. And also, we don't know what the consequences of regen and injecting ammonia in exhaust is 20 years from now. Right? We're not sure what that's going to be 20 years from now. We may have something that is unforeseen in the future. Who knows? Maybe 20 or 30 years from now, somebody will be standing up here and they'll say, oh my God, what were you doing? We were injecting ammonia in these regen engines and look what happened. Probably not, but that could be the case. So diesel engine exhaust is not safe regardless of the generation of the rig. And so I encourage people, hook the extractors up. If you don't have them, use them. In our case, we're upgrading to automated wireless systems that will be activated by either brake pedal application or a button in the cab that the engineer will hit. So that's the direction we're headed. And then close the doors during a regen or a pre-trip. I don't know how many times do you go out for a regen and the engineer's just sitting in there eating dinner and running the rig and the station's filling up with diesel exhaust. That particulate's settling on the exercise gear, it's settling on the lockers and so forth, and there's no good reason to do that. And then lastly, stay out of the smoke at a brush fire. I don't know how you do that, but give it a shot. So this thing here is new to me. To our industrial hygienist folks, it's not. They know all about this. But it was, and if you're a confined space, USAR type person, you're probably aware of this, but I was not, and I was surprised. And so I have to dumb it down for me, and hopefully some of you will benefit by that. But this thing is called assigned protection factor. And when you have a respiratory protection program, the Department of Labor, and they administer this thing, they assign like a value to each form of respiratory protection that you wear. So the gizmo that you're wearing, like how much safer it is when you wear that compared to outside. So if I have an APR on, it has an assigned protection factor of 10. So like I'm 10 times safer, and that's not completely accurate, but the degree of safety is 10 times greater, for the sake of conversation, than ambient air, being outside in the environment. PAPR, right, 25 times. Okay, seems pretty good. Well, SCBA, or positive pressure breather, really, positive pressure breather, maybe some of you know, but I was floored. The safety factor is 10,000. 10,000. So 10, 25, 10,000. So people say, hey, I'm getting tired. I want to wear APR. I would suggest that's the wrong thing to do. There should never be a compulsion on the part of any officer to ever allow a firefighter to reduce their degree of respiratory protection because they're tired. Take a break, call more resources, rotate amongst assignments. The reality is there is nothing on the horizon that's going to replace the SCBA. Not in the near future. I think we remember years ago the IFF was testing the different SCBAs and that sort of thing, but the current iteration of what we have, it's going to be this way for decades to come, right? At least for our careers in here. So it's going to be heavy, it's going to be cumbersome, but it provides unsurpassed respiratory protection in environments for which we have no idea what we're exposed to. You got to wear your breather. So you may think, and I know you don't think this because you're all here and you're highly motivated and you're in this leadership positions and I'm so grateful you're here, and you say, and I know that you believe change will occur. But there are those out there that may have struggled with change. There are those that may struggle with that. So I want to remind folks that we have changed over time, right? If you look from left to right, you can see that we've progressed significantly. And to illustrate that point, when I teach this thing, I tell people, I say, hey, I said, if I came out and worked with you tonight, and I work on straight days, we call it, in the office, and so you would be alarmed. You'd be thinking, why is this guy sitting next to me? I'm like, I'm working overtime, it's okay. And so you're concerned, and you're thinking, I hope I don't get a fire with the guy from the office. And of course, we do get a fire. And you stretch the line to the door, and I bumble my way up there, and I can hardly get my stuff on. And I get up to the door, and you bleed the air and set the nozzle, the pattern, and you're ready to roll. We force the door, you force the door, and you look at me, and you're like, you ready to go? And I'm like, I'm ready to go. And I don't have my BA on. And you're going to be like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm not a wimp. Let's roll. I'm ready to fight some fire. Let's get it on. And are you going to let me go in? Not in a million years. You're not going to let me, not in a million years. You're going to send me back to the rig. You're going to call me a dope. You're going to say those straight day guys shouldn't be working in operations. Maybe there's merit to that. I don't know. And then I'm going to be on every refrigerator in the whole station. Everybody's going to make fun of me and laugh at my expense, and it's going to be great fun because I tried to go into a fire without my BA on. But I would suggest to every one of you that 30 years ago in your organizations, they were likely optional or didn't exist. So maybe there are some of you in this room that went into fires and stayed real low. I don't know how you did it. I give credit to you. You were dumb, but I give you credit. You were tough, and you stayed low when you went in. And I would suggest that that was the norm. That was the norm 30 years ago. And today it would be absurd to think of that. In the same way the young folks have adapted to the RIC tags. Change is occurring. I hope that on the picture on the far right, when there's a fire tonight in your particular city, after you share this message or you have been sharing your own message, that when people roll in during overhaul, if somebody doesn't have a mask on, they are out. It would be as absurd as them rolling in to interior attack without a BA on. They're going to be on air. That's going to be the norm. The norm is going to be on air during overhaul. Does it mean greater light and air utilization? Does it tax our resources? Absolutely. But that's the way we got to change to address this pressing issue. Change will occur whether we like it or not. And I will say this, in our organization, I've been disconnected from the ranks here for a couple years, and I'm teaching at in-service training right now, gross decontamination, washing ourselves off and using the personal decontamination wipes. And I have been remarkably or pleasantly surprised at the degree of, I guess, penetration we made into that group in terms of changing their minds. Cognitively, people are really in tune with cancer risk reduction. Now, and that was echoed by our wellness folks, chatting with them about this issue. Does that translate to action when you're fatigued and when you're subject to peer pressure? I don't know. Certainly, those issues are big factors, but it's remarkable the degree of sort of cognitive engagement with cancer risk reduction, and I've been very pleasantly surprised. So clean body. So that was clean air, and now clean body. So we're engaging in gross decon. You've probably seen a lot of this. We talked about the personal decontamination wipes, and we talk about washing ourselves off at the scene. So what we're doing now is we're encouraging folks at the end of an event, of course, to remain on air because your gear is off-gassing, and then wash yourselves off, use a soft brush and whatever soap you're using. We're using Citrus Squeeze to wash our gear and scrub ourselves down and leave the carcinogens at the scene. What's the point of gross decon? It's to leave the bad stuff at the fire, right? So for how many years have we drugged stuff back into the rig and back to the station? The rig is our workspace, right? The rig is our workspace. And so we perpetually take the fire and put it in the rig and drag it back to the station and continue to expose ourselves. We've all walked into a fire station and you say, oh, you guys just got a fire last night. That's great, I can smell it. And they're like, no, that was 5 days ago. You've been on days off. And you're like, oh, wow, well, good for you, right? So they've been smelling those toxins for 5 days. And are they in a degree that is great enough to cause disease? I don't know the answer to that. Probably nobody knows the answer to that. But I would suggest that those smells that you're subjecting yourself by failing to engage in gross decon and dragging contaminants back into the rig and the fire station do not promote health. That does not promote health. So what can we do? We can leave the fire at the fire scene. Wash your gear off, bag your gear up in a garbage bag, throw it in the rig, drive back to quarters. Then clean your gear back at the fire station. So, and of course you have to address the issues of, well, what if we get another fire and we get another incident? And that's for you to decide in your particular organizations. But I would suggest you can certainly figure that out. People can wear wet gear and go to incidents and so forth. But that's a smaller issue to address. So engage in gross decontamination. And then use a personal decontamination wipe, right? So use a personal decontamination wipe to get yourself cleaned up. For those folks that walk out of the structure, remember that pull the hood down around their neck and they go out to the tailboard to talk about what a great job they did and wait for the investigator to show up and drink some water. I would say every time you're going to eat or drink, use personal decontamination wipes. On your hands, on your face, on your jawline, on your neck. Can you ingest carcinogens? For sure. We're not supposed to eat the char on a steak, even though it tastes really good, right? We're not supposed to eat the char on a steak. It causes cancer in your GI tract. In the same way that if you rub the char off the steak and repeatedly put it on your skin year after year, it may likely cause cancer. So we provide people with the tools to remove the carcinogens as quick as they can. So please purchase personal decontamination wipes and promote that practice. And then take a shower immediately upon return to the station. Make it a priority. So hood exchange. So I advocate, suggest that all your departments provide your employees with multiple hoods. However you go about that, certainly is unique to your organization, but provide hoods for everyone. Now, and when I say we're almost done a lot because it kind of keeps you on edge. We really are almost done. So if you have to go to the bathroom, it's only going to be another minute, and so bear with me. If you have asked firefighters, what is the San Diego firefighters, I can safely say, because I've asked many, what is the single biggest way the fire service is jamming you up in terms of cancer risk reduction? They say we don't have the right washers. We don't have the right washers. And so I want to speak a little bit about that because we've taken a different approach to that, and I want to share that with you, and I want you to understand why we did that. And so, and bear with me because this is a little washer history. And the internet's a marvelous thing because I actually connected with a washer historian in London, and I didn't know there was he wasn't a washer historian, he was an appliance historian, so he did all appliances. But we did talk a bit about washers. And so I would ask you, and I know what you would tell me, I would say, hey, what kind of washer do you need to have in your fire station? You're going to tell me you need a extractor. I need an extractor. I need that. So I get in my position. I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like, how does it extract? Like, what is it? It looks like a washer to me. So I'm like, I got to figure this out. So I connect with this appliance historian and do a little reading and come to find out Extractor means high-speed spin of your gear, right? So what happened is, in World War II, they made electric washers, and this really is going somewhere, so bear with me. So they have washers, and the stuff comes out, and it's soaking wet. They stick it on the line, it takes all day to dry. So then they make this other machine, and they set it right next to it, and it spins the gear real fast, or your laundry, spins it real fast, and it sheds the water through centrifugal force. We call that spin. And actually, Chief Weber's machine at home has a button that says high-speed extract. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, so I'm telling you the truth. And so the machine is spinning very fast to shed the water, In fact, our lifeguard service has extractors in the lifeguard tower so they can take their trunks and stuff and throw it in there. And it doesn't have anything to do with washing. It spins it super fast, sheds the water, and their gear doesn't get mold on it. Right? So an extractor has nothing to do with washing the gear. It has everything to do with very high-speed spin. Okay? So where's the irony in that? If you're familiar with NFPA 1851, what does it say? It only cares about a couple things. Don't spin your gear faster than 100 Gs and wash it in a temperature less than 105. So the very feature by which we refer to the machines that we think we want, extractors, is a feature that we can't use because the machines you get and you put in your stations that you call extractors are governed down. So what we really need are heavy-duty programmable commercial washing machines that we can adjust the water temperature, the spin speed, the number of rinse cycles, and do all those things. Why did we gravitate to that term? Because when the fire service got in the business of washing gear, they said, well, who has heavy-duty industrial washing machines that we can turn to for advice? And they said the hotel industry, the lodging industry, the prison industry. They have big, giant washers. Well, they call them extractors. And why do they call them extractors? Because it plays into their business model. If you own the Hyatt Regency or the Sheraton across the street, and you wash 100 pounds of sheets at a time, you want to dry them as quick as you can. And one way to dry them as quick as you can is to spin them at 600 Gs. When you pull them out of the machine, which is really fast, you pull them out of the machine, they're dry, essentially. You reduce utility costs and speed linen turnaround time. It's very good for their business. But it's not good for washing PPE, as explicitly stated by NFPA 1851 and all the manufacturers. We can't use that feature. So we chose this particular model. Why? This is a heavy-duty programmable commercial washing machine. It's a small machine. Why'd we pick it? Money, obviously. And our fire stations are old. We needed a machine that would fit in the same footprint, that didn't require a 220 or a 3-inch drain, that we could install tomorrow. And we found this machine. It has a smaller capacity, absolutely. But does it meet all the requirements? Absolutely. So this is an option. I just want to put that forward to you. I want you to understand what the manufacturers are saying, and I want you to understand that oftentimes the most expensive, while there may be value in it and longevity and that sort of thing, it doesn't mean that you can't achieve it at a reduced cost and still achieve the same goal. And to that end, I also want you to say, well, are this 105 and the spin speed less than 100? That must be based on science. And I would say absolutely not. It's not based on science. Absolutely not based on science, those recommendations. They're doing the research right now. If you've read the NFPA's PPE cleaning validation study, right? If you've seen that, the NFPA is doing the research right now to determine in a laboratory how our gear is contaminated and how to effectively clean it. How many rinse cycles, how much water, how hot. Because all the stuff that we're doing is not based on evidence, it's based on best guess. And I'm sure there's merit to that. Nobody's trying to do foul, but we haven't validated it in a laboratory, so they're doing that today. So I just want you to understand there's several ways to skin a cat. This is the route we chose, and understand kind of what the industry's pushing and that sort of thing. It's a heavy-duty programmable commercial washing machine is what we need, and this is, again, the route that we chose. So this is our program right here. You could have said, hey, you know what? Can I just have the Cliff's Notes? And this would have been it, right? And this is our program right here. This is in all our apparatus. It's throughout our fire stations. And on the back, we have explicit directions about our hood exchange program and personal decon. But this captures the essence of our program right here. You could have skipped the whole thing and just had this, but then you wouldn't have had the good pleasure of watching me fiddle with technology and so forth. So, again, almost done. I want to remind you what is the single biggest barrier to success or the success of this endeavor. The single biggest barrier is latency. The biggest challenge we face is latency. If we could arrange, of course we don't want to do this, but if we could arrange for you to get cancer on Wednesday when you didn't wear your breather on Monday, we wouldn't need this program. Or we wouldn't need the program because people would get it, they'd wear their breather. This event happens, I get sick. Well, cancer's not that way. The things that we do today are not going to come back to haunt us until we're about to retire. That's when it's going to come back to haunt us. For the same reason people don't save money for retirement, is because they just don't get it. They can't connect the dots. It's hard for people to connect the dots between their actions today and what happens 25 years from now. So latency is our single biggest impediment to success. I don't know what the solution for that is. That's a tough one to crack. But we hopefully will achieve that through behavioral change and so forth, and risk reduction in the workplace. And then, of course, you get this on the far right, is cut the macho guy stuff, right? You know, the people, we all know who goes to the burn trailer, and we can see their helmet, and we can see their gear, and we want to remind people that we're redefining what the image of a professional firefighter looks like. The professional firefighter of yesteryear was the one that had the dirty gear and the melted helmet, and, you know, it spoke volumes about their experience and prowess on the fire ground, and that was how we measured, you know, the person. And I would suggest to you that we adopt a more military mindset, for example, and that would be that we destroy our gear as we're using it, and then we clean it up and prepare it for the next mission. We make it inspection ready, and then we destroy our gear. The idea that we allow our gear to speak for our firefighting prowess is an antiquated thought. It's killing us to some degree, and so what we need to do is redefine what the image of a professional firefighter looks like. A professional firefighter has clean gear, a squared away helmet, is prepared to fight the next fire, and so we need to dump the Marlboro Man. So, and then lastly, I would suggest that if you can remember nothing from this whole presentation, that we were the people on the left before, and we're the people on the right after the course, right? So Mr. Clean hooks up an exhaust, Mr. or Mrs. Clean hooks up an exhaust extractor. They wash their gear after just a dumpster fire. They don't wear their bunkers at night unnecessarily. They mask up on unattended food. They close the doors during regen or pre-trip. They take control of all the risk factors over which they have total control on an everyday basis in order to reduce their long-term risk and ultimately make it to retirement healthy and enjoy the fruits of their labor. And then this here, the buy-in helmet sticker. This is the end of the presentation. I know you're thankful for that. But this sticker here, we provide to our members. So our department agreed to allow folks to put this on the back of their helmet, and it's a social contract. Actually, it's ironic that we're doing it today because today's a primary voting day. And so folks are they all want the I voted sticker. So there was an article in the Atlantic stumbled upon, and it talked about why do people want that? They want that because it's a social contract, and it tells all of you that I did the right thing. I'm doing the right thing. I voted. Because I know I do my mail-in thing, but sometimes I go drop it off, and I told my wife last year, I said, get me the sticker. I'm going to go to the store. I want everyone to know that I'm doing the right thing. So we ask our folks, we say, hey, if you buy into the program, if you believe in doing the right thing, if you believe in staying on air, if you believe in washing your gear, and you believe in doing the little things every day that stand to make a big difference over the course of your career, put this helmet on the back of your sticker, which is this logo. And you guys can have this in your organization if it says Newport Beach, or it says Solana Beach, or it says Chula Vista, and on the back of the helmet. And it's a social contract. And what it does is, I remind people, what it does is it announces to everyone that you're willing to be called out for being stupid, and you're not going to get your feelings hurt. Right? So this says, when I'm doing the wrong thing, you call me out. And I'm going to promise to you that I'm not going to get my feelings hurt. And it makes it easy for officers, right? So the officer doesn't have to say, oh, you got to get on your this, that, whatever it might be. They can just point to the sticker and say, hey, the contract doesn't make them be the bad guy. And I remind people that's peers, supervisors, whatever it might be. They point to the sticker, they do the right thing. So I think this is an important social contract. And then I tell the folks in the room, if you don't buy into this and you think I'm all wet, please don't take the sticker. But eventually when you do wake up and you realize how dumb you are, I'll come out in the middle of the night and deliver a sticker to you, you put it on your helmet. So anyway, and then next is interview and pre-designated physician. I just want people to be aware of that. And I'm sure that's unique to various different municipalities and so forth, but be familiar with workers' compensation laws, work with your risk management. We have our risk management folks from the city of San Diego here, and I can tell you they've been wonderful to us. They're helping us to navigate a very complicated subject, and we're learning a lot, and we couldn't be more grateful that they took the time out of their day to be here to help understand this problem to an even greater degree. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you very much. And then keep a record. I think Brian Frieders is going to speak to a bit of that about exposure reporting and that in the panel discussion. So I'll leave that to him. And I think that's about it. So anybody got any questions? Anybody want to go to the bathroom? So is that it? Yeah. Okay. That's it. Okay. Thanks, Jim.